I'm a state senator in Virginia. I've been in the legislature now for about 9.5 years. The district I represent today goes from basically the Woodrow Wilson Bridge down to where the hot lanes end on I-95, Garrisonville Road, if you know where that is. I represent Fairfax, Prince William, and Stafford counties, about 60 miles of Potomac shoreline, from up there all the way down to the end of the Widewater Peninsula. And so trash and water issues have always been pretty much on the forefront of my mind. Not many Virginia legislators get to represent the Potomac River. And so I have a whole subset of issues I have to deal with that nobody else does, and that's partly why I got focused on this. And also I never thought when I got elected I'd be speaking at a trash summit, but it's you never know where this job takes you. So as Lori mentioned, so the district I represent is a largely the Route 1 corridor. And for those of you that don't know the Route 1 corridor, it's the part of Northern Virginia that a lot of people don't talk about a lot. It's one of the most sort of racially diverse, lower income parts of Northern Virginia. It's a lot of the older part of Northern Virginia. It's the business corridor from 60 years ago. Never quite all the redevelopment and modern stormwater and all the changes that we've seen sort of north and west of I-95 have never occurred sort of east of I-95 over where I am. And so after I got elected, one of my constituents came to me. He lived near a creek that fed into the Potomac, into actually Great Hunting Creek, and he had me come down and walk the woods behind his house where there'd been a homeless camp, and I was just shocked at the amount of trash and litter. And there's a trailer park down there where people would pull their car out and empty their oil right into the stream, things like that. And I was just shocked, and so I organized a cleanup. As soon as I did that, I had other constituents reach out to me and say, "What about my creek? And what about my creek?" And so next I went downstream to Little Hunting Creek. And for those of you who don't know Little Hunting Creek is the creek that starts in Hybla Valley, and then it runs out along Route 1, goes under Route 1 twice actually, and then it pops out next to Mount Vernon. So this is the stream that empties right next to George Washington's house. And the group I worked with had been dealing with everything downstream, right where it hits the Potomac. I did one cleanup with them, and I said, "Well, what about upstream?" And they said, "Well, we've never gone up there." And so I went in there, and the first year that I went in, we found 180 shopping carts actually buried in the creek. So I'm not talking about in the woods, but these are carts that are actually in the creek. And I don't know how many people ever had to take a cart out of a creek bed. But when a shopping cart falls into a stream, it'll roll for a while, then it'll fall over, and then it'll get stuck, and then it'll start capturing everything and anything coming down the creek in those bends and leaves. And then what happens is when the water runs through it, it starts to bury itself, and pretty soon there'll be nothing sticking out but a wheel or an edge of the cart. And to pull that sucker out, we basically had to get a chain winch, and it takes us maybe about an hour and a half per cart to get each one out of the creek bed, because you can't just use a shovel and pull it. You have to have some major G-forces to get that sucker out. So we did 3 cleanups that first year, and that one creek, and took 180 shopping carts out, in addition to everything else that I'm sure you guys have seen. Plenty of balls and bags and bottles and food containers, and we've taken out guns and bikes and tractor tires and everything else. But these shopping carts were really shock to me and also to my community. And so far, I think we've taken, in the 5 or 6 cleanups we've done now, about 230 shopping carts out of this creek. It's a recurring problem that we can't seem to solve. And so I learned a whole lot about trash, and we got it. I also felt like I needed to shame a lot of these businesses that were causing these shopping carts and all this stuff to appear, and so we started getting a lot of media attention on it. That sort of woke the community up that this is a real problem, because most of these streams are out of sight. They're back in the woods. Nobody goes back there. Nobody sees them. There's no paths along them. And so we got all this media attention, and that's when I started to get these businesses to pay attention. I got Walmart to write a $5,000 check to one of my local environmental charities. And then I put in a bill, and they got mad at me. They said, "We wrote you a check. Why'd you put in a bill?" I'm like, "That's not how it works." But in any event, so I got this reputation for being the shopping cart warrior of Mount Vernon. So, but a couple of things I just want to mention about first of all, lessons I've learned, and then ideas that I've got about how to fix all the problems I think you guys are dealing with, is number one, from my perspective, if people know about these creek cleanups, they love to come do them. And if you get the word out, it's a very easy thing for people to do, to feel involved, engaged in their community. It's also a great way to build awareness about the problem, is to get people actually into the creek and start touching this stuff. Number two, kids love to do it, and parents love to get their kids to do it. And so it's a good sort of gateway drug for civic activism for children. So if you can get, Cub Scout troops, Boy Scout troops. And at my high school, we got the ROTC class to come do it. A lot of these kids need service hours, but if you can promote it to the environmental science teachers, et cetera, it's a great way to get kids to get involved and to raise awareness. And the reason I think children are so important, and by the way, the press also loves this stuff. I mean, because when you get these pictures, these graphic pictures of all this crap you find, the press is just shocked. They love to put that up in their articles to show people what they're doing. But back to the kids. One of the reasons I think the kids are so important is because, at least from my perspective in the district that I represent, a lot of the reason this is happening is because of cultural differences. And the Route 1 corridor, my district I represent today is about 24% foreign born. So about one in every 4 people I represent was born in another country. Not as much true with their children, but I mean, there's obviously some kids who are born in another country that are brought in, but a lot of their parents aren't. And anybody who's ever been south of the border, knows that as soon as you cross the American border, there's trash everywhere. And there's a very different ethic about trash and litter in other countries. And a lot of people, when they come here, don't understand exactly, what Lady Bird Johnson taught us back in the 60s about, picking up litter. And I think there's a whole segment of the community that needs to be educated about what the proper ethic is in our community. And I think that starts with kids. It's how we got parents to put on seatbelts. It's how we get parents to put down their phones and stop texting. And if we get those kids out to talk to their parents, when they see their parents throw something out the window, they say, you don't do that. That's, I think, a good way to stop this from happening. And so I think the more kids we can get educated, the more elementary schools, others we can get involved in this, I think it'll make a big difference. But the other thing that I learned is that I feel like one of the biggest culprits in this whole mess is our local governments. And my local government gets really pissed off when I say that. But the reality is the bulk of the trash that gets dumped into the creeks in my district are basically put there by our stormwater systems. We have, at least in the older parts of Northern Virginia, the stormwater systems were constructed before modern stormwater design was in place. And so you don't have these, stormwater retention ponds, you don't have, these, whatever they call them, not TMDLs, or not TMDLs, they're, you don't have these little, places where the water aggregates before it goes in. Yeah, BMPs, right. You don't have these BMPs, and so you basically just have a drain which goes into a pipe, and a pipe that goes in the creek. And so basically anything that goes into the ground goes in the drain, goes in the pipe, goes into the creek. And so basically the stormwater system acts as a massive trash, accumulator that dumps it into our streams. And from my point of view, one of the easiest ways to deal with this is to get our local governments to actually start enforcing their litter laws, but also getting them to do something about their stormwater systems via their MS4 permit, because every one of these stormwater pipes is a point source polluter under the Clean Water Act, and every state regulatory agency has the ability to order local governments around based on the MS4 permit. And so I've raised this with my local government, and they all tell me, that's great, go find me some money, I'll deal with it. And then I tell them, no, this is your problem, it's your system, it's not my problem. And we're in the middle of this constant stare down. So, but in any event, one of the lessons I've learned is I think that's really a big source of the problem is old, outdated stormwater system. Because if you had modern stuff, it would go in the pond and it would aggregate in the pond instead of getting into the stream. Most of it would, not all of it. So, in terms of solutions, I think that the messing around with either a trash TMDL like the Anacostia has or an MS4 permit, I mean, I'd love to do that, but those are kind of like nuclear remedies, and I'm perfectly happy doing it, and I've threatened my locality with it. I haven't been able to get my state regulator to do it yet, but we've had some very tense meetings with my local stormwater agency about you need to get your act together or this is coming. And they need to understand that that's a possibility, that if they continue to aggregate, collect, pollute, dump trash in these streams, that there's going to be a consequence for it, and it could be, a TMDL where they've got a state regulator looking over their body and counting bags and tires and trash and bikes and whatever, and that they got to do something about it if they don't clean up their act. So that to me is sort of at the very end, but it's a solution that you got to hold out there and as a possibility, so that some of these local officials start to deal with it and raise it on their priority list, which there's always competing priorities for money, and trash is like towards the lower end of the list for a lot of these local governments. So we got to raise it. Beyond that, I would say that we need to get our local governments to have better laws in place. Now, I don't know, how many people here in Virginia? About half the room. So Virginia is very different from Maryland and D.C. D.C., you got to worry about Congress coming in and trumping you. Maryland local governments have a little bit more authority than in Virginia. Virginia, we're a Dillon rule state, and what every local government official will tell you is, I can't do that because the legislature hadn't let me do that. And that's sometimes true, sometimes not true. But our local governments do have authority to enact some litter ordinances. And for example, in Fairfax County, I've been pressing them to try and enact an ordinance to prohibit a dumpster within so many feet of a stormwater drain. On the Little Hind Creek that I've been to, almost every single dumpster, even on a county-owned property, is sitting right in front of a stormwater drain. So basically anything that doesn't make it in the dumpster goes right in the drain whenever it rains. And I haven't been able to get the county to enact that because the business community complained, and for some reason they're responsive to that. But in any event, I think that would be an easy solution to resolve this problem. Also, many of our Northern Virginia jurisdictions are complaint-driven, which means we don't enforce our laws unless somebody yells at us. And another policy which drives me crazy, but I went out there and took pictures, one day of, trash laying in front of dozens of these stormwater drains and sent it to them, and they still didn't enforce the law. But they claim they're complaint-driven, and so you have to complain a lot. You have to document these things, take pictures, and get them to finally start enforcing their ordinances about making people keep their trash in their dumpsters. So I think, being organized and systematic and coordinated about that is one way you can get these local governments to actually enforce their laws. A lot of the other solutions, at least at the Virginia level, lie with the legislature. So, for example, one of the bills I put in would have enabled every locality in Virginia to enact a shopping cart ordinance. And that basically, at least in Virginia Beach, they've adopted an ordinance. Virginia Beach is a little different because it's a city, it's not a county, and so the cities have broader powers under their charters than counties do in Virginia. In Fairfax, Northern Virginia, we have Arlington, Loudoun, Prince William, Fairfax are all counties. Alexandria is the only city. But the bill would have basically said that if you find somebody's shopping cart in a creek and you notify the retailer, hey, your cart's over there in that creek, you got 5 days to come clean it up. If you don't, this county can go clean it up and cite them for it, fine them, charge them for the cost of cleaning it up, and make them deal with it. I came within one vote of passing that bill about 4 years ago on a committee, at least, when our body, back when the legislature was a lot more stacked against me. I was surprised I came that close. But I think this year, I'm going to put it in again this year because Fairfax County's finally asked me to do it because they're having so many problems with rogue shopping carts. I drive around the Route 1 and I say to my kids, look, free-range shopping carts. They're right over there. And like, there's a rogue one over there. It's escaped, Once you start looking for them, you'd be shocked how many you see. Trust me, I'm paranoid about them now. But in any event, I think there's ordinances you can pass to hold these retailers accountable for their shopping carts. I mean, I eventually got Walmart to put a cart control system, I don't know how much money, they spent like $10,000 or $20,000 on a cart control system, but the carts seem to still escape. And Costco, when they built a new Costco right next to the creek, I tried to get them to put one in. They were like, our customers would never steal a shopping cart. I don't know what you're talking about. And I've taken 5 Costco carts out in the last 2 years. So, but getting these retailers to put in cart control systems is another solution, but it's very hard because they're expensive, and it's a lot cheaper if you get them doing it on the front end, which your local government can do when they're asking for their rezoning or asking for their permit or whatever. But in any event, that ordinance, I think, would help a lot to get these businesses to pay more attention to where their customers are taking their carts and make sure they don't leave the premises. So, shopping cart ordinances. Number 2, everybody in Virginia wants to talk about a bottle deposit law, plastic bag tax, plastic bag fee, plastic bag ban, all those things. We can't do that in Virginia without the General Assembly blessing it. That's pretty clear. And those bills are introduced every single year in Richmond, and they die every single year, mainly on a party line vote, though. And I'm really optimistic about the political future in Virginia. Right now, the state Senate is 21-19 Republican, the House of Delegates, and we need one more Senate seat. We get the majority there because we have the lieutenant governor, so all we need is him to flip it. But in the House of Delegates is now 51-49 thanks to a film canister. Would have been 50-50 if they pulled the right canister out of the bowl. But in the House, they need to take 2 seats to take the majority. And with the current political environment, and I don't know that you saw, there's a redistricting decision that came down. They got to redraw 31 seats in Richmond and Hampton Roads in the next 3 months. There's optimism that in 2019, the Virginia legislature both chambers might flip. I think the Senate's probably a better bet for me, but also in general than the House is. But if those right now, all these bills die in committee. I think if they were on the floor, we'd get a lot of votes for them, but they all die in the committees because, the retailers and all the other people that care about this stuff spread their money strategically, and these bills die. So, but I'm optimistic in 2019 we might get some stuff done, or at least in the couple years after that, to give our localities more authority because, again, the bag tax, the bag ban happen every year. Bottle deposit law is a little harder because there's a lot of infrastructure required to do a bottle deposit law, and Maryland doesn't even have that yet, I think, do they? Yeah. So, but I can tell you, at least politically, the legislature will be a lot more open to those kinds of solutions once the legislature changes. And then one last thing, and then I think the local governments will be happy to do it. They're starved for revenue, and they'd love to have some more things to help diversify their revenue sources like plastic bags. So, and the last thing I'll say, I think I was supposed to go 10 minutes. I'm probably pushing it, right? The last thing I'll say really quick is one of the other things we're pushing right now is we're about to rebuild the entire Route 1 corridor all the way from the Woodrow Wilson Bridge down, actually all the way down to Quantico. And one of the things I'm pushing VDOT is to try and incorporate trash and litter, obstruction, collection, whatever, as part of their road design whenever a stream goes under the road, because they just don't think about that. They don't think about designing any kind of infrastructure that would allow somebody to access a trash catcher under the bridge as part of the road design. And when you're designing the road, that's the best and easiest time to get that done. And one of the things that Fairfax County did after I threatened their MS4 permit is they went out and they finally got a company to propose a trash catcher in Little Hunting Creek, at least on one part of it. It took them 5 years, but they finally announced to me yesterday they've gained access to the land so they can actually put it in the next few months. But it'd be nice to be able to put these under the road every time there's a stream crossing on the road, and so their employees can actually access the catcher device to clean it out or whatever. And so as part of the road redesign, we're asking to do that, and we went to VDOT, and VDOT was like, we've never done that before, nobody's ever asked us before, and we hadn't thought about that, but I think it's a big part of trying to do this as we rebuild infrastructure in Northern Virginia.